s'il me prend dans ses bras.
Hollywood has never forgotten the moment Marlene Dietrich first walked onto the screen. Draped in tuxedo and top hat, a cigarette between her fingers, she looked straight into the camera with a confidence that unsettled as much as it seduced. And then, she leaned forward and kissed a woman. In 1930, at the height of America's moral conservatism, this was not just a scene in Morocco, it was a revolution. Dietrich was more than a star. She was a paradox wrapped in satin and steel. Critics called her the ultimate enigma. Film writer Kenneth Tynan once remarked, "She has sex, but no positive gender. Her masculinity appeals to women, and her sexuality to men." She was living proof that desire could not be confined to categories, that allure did not belong exclusively to one side of the spectrum. Long before Hollywood claimed her, Dietrich was already legendary in Berlin's wild 1,920 seconds nightlife. In smoky cabarets, she discovered that power could be performed, gender could be bent, and attraction could be wielded like a weapon. The city's freedom seeped into her bones, shaping the woman who would one day stand before cameras and make the world question its own rules. When she crossed the Atlantic, she carried Berlin's decadence into America's most controlled dream factory. On screen, she smoldered in gowns, but off-screen, she stunned in tailored suits. Her voice was low, her manner unapologetically cool, and her image deliberately androgynous. She became the embodiment of something dangerous, a woman who refused to choose between roles. And in her private life, she lived just as boldly. Dietrich loved men of power, Jean Gabin, Eric Maria Remarque, even Ernest Hemingway. But she also shared passions with women, Greta Garbo among them. To Marlene, love was not defined by gender, only by intensity. She crossed boundaries and made them disappear, leaving behind a trail of whispered stories and unforgettable legends. Marlene Dietrich was not only Hollywood's most sensual star, she was its greatest rebel. She didn't just blur the lines of desire, she danced right over them, in heels, in tuxedos, on her own uncompromising terms. In Hollywood's golden age, image was everything. Studios dictated how stars dressed, how they spoke, even whom they were seen with. Women were expected to embody glamour, soft, delicate, and endlessly appealing to male desire. Yet Marlene Dietrich refused every one of those rules. She could be radiant in satin gowns one evening, and the next, stride into a nightclub wearing a tuxedo with a flower pinned to her lapel. That duality was her power. Audiences didn't simply watch Dietrich, they were captivated by her mystery. Was she femme fatale or gentleman rogue, a temptress or a trickster? The truth was, she was all of these and none of them. Dietrich invented a new form of stardom, one that thrived not on clarity but on contradiction. And behind the camera's glow, she lived with the same boldness. In an era ruled by the restrictive Hays Code, which punished even the hint of immorality, Dietrich carried herself as though no law could reach her. She fell in love freely with men, with women, with anyone who sparked her restless spirit. She didn't just break boundaries, she made them irrelevant. Her story is not only about stardom, but about freedom. Over the next 10 fragments, we'll uncover the moments that made Marlene Dietrich more than a star. From her youth in Berlin's cabarets, to her daring kiss on screen, to the whispered affairs that scandalized and fascinated in equal measure, and finally, to the enduring legacy of a woman who lived without compromise. Long before Hollywood crowned her as its most daring star, Marlene Dietrich was a young woman shaped by Berlin's wild heartbeat. In the 1,920 seconds, Berlin was unlike any other city in the world. Jazz spilled from smoky cabarets, neon lights glittered on rain-soaked streets, and the Weimar Republic's nightlife became a laboratory of freedom, sexual, artistic, and political. It was here that Dietrich first discovered the power of transformation. Born in 1901 to a respectable German family, she was expected to live within the bounds of tradition. But Berlin offered her an escape. As a teenager, she studied violin before turning to theater, seduced by the electricity of performance. In the clubs and cabarets, she learned that allure was something one could invent, refine, and weaponize. A tuxedo could be as sensual as a gown, a husky laugh as disarming as a song. Berlin's openness emboldened her. In smoky backrooms, she witnessed women dancing with women, men with men, and no one blinking an eye. For Marlene, attraction was not a question of rules, but of chemistry. She carried that revelation with her for the rest of her life. It was also in Berlin that director Josef von Sternberg first noticed her. He would later shape her into the Lola Lola of the Blue Angel, a role that would launch her international stardom. But before Hollywood scripts and studio contracts, there was Berlin, the city that gave her permission to be free, to test every boundary, and to become the woman who would one day scandalize and enchant the entire world. In 1930, Marlene Dietrich stepped into the role that would alter the course of her life and Hollywood's idea of allure forever. Cast as Lola Lola in Josef von Sternberg's The Blue Angel, she embodied a nightclub singer whose smoky voice and languid movements could unravel a man's dignity in a single performance. The film told the story of a stern professor destroyed by his obsession with Lola, but audiences didn't remember the professor. They remembered Dietrich perched on a chair in a black corset, garters gleaming under the spotlight, singing "Falling in Love Again" with a sly smile that promised both pleasure and ruin. She was not simply acting, she was rewriting what it meant to be sensual on screen. The Blue Angel was more than a German hit, it was a cultural explosion. Von Sternberg recognized Dietrich's magnetism and brought her to Hollywood, where Paramount quickly signed her. In the middle of the Great Depression, American audiences longed for distraction, and Dietrich offered something they had never seen. A woman who owned her sexuality, who teased but never begged, who exuded dominance as much as beauty. With one role, Dietrich transformed from a Berlin cabaret performer into an international star. Hollywood adored her, critics debated her, and censors trembled at her audacity. She was no longer Marlene from Berlin. She was Dietrich, the new face of seduction, and the world would never look at femininity in quite the same way again. If The Blue Angel made Marlene Dietrich a star, Morocco made her immortal. In her very first Hollywood film, released in 1930, she shattered the boundaries of what audiences thought possible for a leading lady. Playing the cabaret singer Amy Jolly, Dietrich delivered a performance steeped in cool detachment and magnetic charm. But it was one scene that etched itself into history. Dressed in a tuxedo, top hat tilted, she strode onto the stage not as a woman playing a part, but as a vision of something thrillingly new. With a cigarette in hand and a sly smile, she leaned down and kissed another woman full on the lips. The audience in the theater gasped. The Hays Code, Hollywood's moral law, was still a few years away, but the culture was already steeped in conservatism. No actress had dared such a gesture on screen before. Dietrich didn't just cross a line, she erased it, and she did it with effortless poise. The moment caused scandal, of course. Newspapers whispered, moralists fumed, and yet audiences returned to see the film again and again. Paramount had gambled on Dietrich, and the gamble paid off. Her tuxedo became an emblem of rebellion, her kiss a legend of cinematic daring. For the first time, millions witnessed not just a performance but a challenge. A woman who claimed the freedom to be both masculine and feminine, dominant and vulnerable, lover and rule breaker. With Morocco, Marlene Dietrich didn't just act, she ignited a cultural firestorm that would burn for decades. More than any line of dialogue, Marlene Dietrich's clothes told her story. At a time when Hollywood insisted its women sparkle in satin gowns and pearls, Dietrich walked confidently into nightclubs wearing tailored suits, crisp shirts, and ties. She didn't just wear men's clothing, she made it magnetic. Her androgynous style became both scandal and sensation. In Paris, she was once warned by police not to appear in public wearing trousers, which were considered improper for women. Dietrich ignored the order. Strolling through the Champs-Élysées in full men's attire, her chin lifted as though daring the world to stop her. Photographers snapped, the images spread, and the legend grew. Here was a woman who bent fashion to her will, not the other way around. On screen, she blended femininity and masculinity with a precision no designer could have scripted. In Morocco, she wore a tuxedo. In Shanghai Express, she draped herself in furs and veils, only to pierce through them with a stare that carried more power than any costume. Whether in satin or wool, her style was not about clothes, it was about command. Dietrich turned fashion into rebellion. Every suit was a statement, every gown a weapon, every glance a reminder that gender could be performed, inverted, and reinvented. Her image was not an accident, but a carefully crafted revolution, one that influenced designers for generations and gave women permission to step beyond the wardrobe society dictated. She didn't just dress for effect, she dressed to declare, "Desire has no uniform." Marlene Dietrich's allure was not confined to the screen. Off camera, she attracted some of the most influential men of her era, and her romances became as legendary as her films. Writers, actors, and military heroes alike fell under her spell not just because of her beauty, but because of her wit, confidence, and refusal to be tamed. One of her most famous lovers was French actor Jean Gabin, whose rugged masculinity seemed the perfect counterpoint to Dietrich's sleek glamour. Their relationship was passionate, stormy, and enduring, two stars circling one another across continents and years. To her friends, Gabin was the great love of her life. She also caught the attention of literary giants. Ernest Hemingway adored her, writing her letters filled with admiration and flirtation, calling her his kraut in a mix of affection and playful irreverence. The celebrated novelist Éric Maria Remarque, author of All Quiet on the Western Front, was also drawn into her orbit, captivated by her intelligence as much as her beauty. These affairs placed Dietrich in the center of cultural and political power. She was seen at parties with generals, dined with world leaders, and lived as though borders and rules were only suggestions. For the men who loved her, she was both muse and mystery, someone who gave them passion but never complete possession. Yet even in these high-profile romances, Dietrich never let herself be defined by the men at her side. She embraced them, enjoyed them, and moved on when she wished. In a world that expected women to be trophies, she flipped the script, making the most powerful men of her age part of her story, not the other way around. If Marlene Dietrich's romances with men filled headlines, her passions with women filled whispers, and those whispers have never stopped. Behind the tuxedos, the smoky voice, and the controlled mystery, Dietrich loved women with the same fearless intensity that marked her career. The most famous name linked to her was Greta Garbo, another Hollywood enigma. Though Garbo was notoriously private, stories circulated of a magnetic pull between the two icons, an attraction that fascinated everyone around them. Whether their bond was fleeting or profound, it added fuel to Dietrich's legend. The idea of two of cinema's greatest faces drawn together in secret. Dietrich was also close to the flamboyant writer Mercedes D'Acosta, known for her affairs with some of the most glamorous women of the century. Their connection blurred the lines between friendship, passion, and creative kinship. Mercedes adored Dietrich's courage, while Dietrich admired her boldness in living openly, however scandalous it seemed. Beyond these famous figures, Dietrich surrounded herself with women who inspired and nurtured her. In Berlin's cabarets, Paris's salons, and Hollywood's hidden gatherings, she cultivated relationships that ignored the categories imposed by society. To Marlene, love was not a matter of gender but of electricity. She gave herself permission to follow that spark wherever it led. While gossip columnists tried to define her, she offered no explanations. The ambiguity was part of her power. She let the world wonder, while she lived freely. Her affairs with women revealed the same truth as her screen persona, that desire does not obey rules. In a world desperate to label her, Dietrich chose to remain unlabeled. That choice made her not just a star, but a symbol of liberation. When the world was plunged into the chaos of World War II, Marlene Dietrich once again proved she was more than just a screen siren. She became a symbol of defiance. Though born in Germany, she refused to lend her name or her art to Hitler's regime. Instead, she turned her back on the land of her birth and pledged her loyalty to America, the country that had given her stardom. Dietrich toured tirelessly with the USO, performing for Allied troops in North Africa, Italy, and the front lines of France. Dressed in military fatigues or glamorous gowns hastily adapted for camp stages, she sang with her signature husky voice, bringing soldiers a taste of home amid the terror of war. Her rendition of Lili Marleen, a song loved by both Allied and German soldiers, became an anthem that carried a bittersweet comfort across enemy lines. Her courage was not only symbolic, she put herself at risk, entertaining within earshot of enemy fire, determined to use her fame as a weapon against fascism. For her efforts, she was awarded the Medal of Freedom by the United States and the Legion of Honor by France, honors that placed her in a rare company of artists who had transformed celebrity into service. This wartime chapter added a new dimension to her legend. Dietrich was no longer only the woman who blurred gender and seduced audiences in tuxedos. She was also a patriot who risked her life to stand for freedom. Reinvention had always been her talent, but in the 1,940 seconds, she reshaped herself not just as a star, but as a heroine. For all her glamour and bravery, Marlene Dietrich lived under a constant storm of scandal. Hollywood could never quite decide whether to crown her or condemn her. Gossip columnists relished every rumor. The tuxedos, the men, the women, the late-night parties that blurred the line between performance and reality. She became both muse and target, admired for her audacity yet punished for refusing to conform. The press painted her as everything from femme fatale to cold manipulator. Whispered tales of affairs with married men ignited outrage. Rumors of her romances with women stirred both fascination and fear. Studios worried about her image, trying to rein her in. But Dietrich thrived on the tension. She understood that scandal was not just a threat, it was a form of currency. Each headline, each rumor, only deepened her mystique. Yet scandal carried a cost. Behind the shimmering gowns and carefully staged photographs, there were times when she felt the weight of being an outsider in the very industry she had conquered. Hollywood adored her when she played by its rules, but recoiled when she exposed its hypocrisies. The same gestures that made her iconic, kissing a woman on screen, wearing men's suits in public, also branded her as dangerous. Dietrich bore it with a cool exterior, her sly smile rarely slipping. She refused apologies, offered no explanations, and let the contradictions feed her legend. In the end, the scandals did not destroy her, they became part of her mythology. To be Marlene Dietrich was to walk a tightrope between worship and rejection, and to turn every stumble into spectacle. In the twilight of her life, Marlene Dietrich chose withdrawal over fading in public. After decades of dazzling stages and scandalizing screens, she retreated to a quiet apartment in Paris. The woman who once strode across film sets in tuxedos and gowns now lived mostly behind drawn curtains, speaking to the world only through carefully chosen phone calls and letters. Visitors described her home as both elegant and melancholy rooms filled with photographs, mementos, and the ghosts of a career that had redefined Hollywood. She rarely allowed herself to be seen, avoiding cameras that might capture her aging body. To Dietrich, the image she had crafted was too important to let time unravel. Better to remain a myth than to appear fragile. Her solitude was not without pain. Years of physical ailments left her bedridden at times, and her legendary wit could turn sharp when probed about the past. Yet she never surrendered her pride. Even in seclusion, she was still Dietrich, her voice commanding over the telephone, her opinions precise, her charisma intact. For admirers, her absence only deepened the aura. The star who once defied every boundary now cultivated mystery as her final act. In Paris, she became a legend of shadows, proving that even silence could be a performance. When the curtain finally fell on Marlene Dietrich's extraordinary life, what remained was more than the image of a glamorous star. She had become a cultural blueprint, a figure who embodied freedom long before the world dared to speak its name. Dietrich was not only Hollywood's face of seduction, she was its boldest rebel. Her legacy lives in every artist who bends gender on stage, every designer who blurs the line between tuxedo and gown, every woman who claims her right to live on her own terms. She taught audiences that allure is not confined by gender, that love does not recognize boundaries, and that scandal can be transformed into strength. Critics once tried to label her femme fatale, temptress, scandal maker, but her true triumph was escaping labels altogether. She became the embodiment of paradox, masculine and feminine, lover and fighter, star and soldier. The power of Dietrich was never in choosing one identity, it was in daring to contain them all. Today, her films still captivate, her songs still echo, and her style still inspires. But more enduring than the images on screen is the lesson she left behind: to live unapologetically, to dance across every boundary with confidence, and to turn life itself into art. Marlene Dietrich was not just a star of her century. She was, and remains, an eternal symbol of desire without borders, freedom without compromise, and courage without end. Hollywood adored illusions. Shimmering gowns, delicate smiles, romances crafted by publicists. Yet no illusion could contain Marlene Dietrich. She was the star who stepped onto the screen in a tuxedo, kissed a woman, and never once asked for permission. For half a century, she stood as living proof that desire cannot be scripted, that identity is not a cage, and that glamour can be as sharp as a blade. Her journey was one of constant reinvention, from Berlin's decadent cabarets, where she first tasted freedom, to the Blue Angel, which gave her an international stage. Dietrich learned early how to wield her magnetism like a weapon. In Hollywood, she became both goddess and provocateur, turning fashion into rebellion, scandal into legend. Each tuxedo, each sly smile, each whispered rumor only tightened her hold on the world's imagination. Yet she was more than a face in the spotlight. During World War II, Dietrich risked her life to perform for Allied troops, proving that her courage stretched far beyond the screen. The medals pinned to her chest were not props. They were acknowledgments of a woman who turned celebrity into service. She blurred the line between seductress and soldier, showing the world that strength and sensuality could coexist in the same body. In her later years, she retreated into seclusion, guarding her image fiercely. Even as she faded from public view, her absence became part of the myth. She understood better than anyone that legends are not sustained by exposure, but by mystery. And so, even behind closed doors in Paris, Dietrich remained untouchable, a star who knew how to turn silence into spectacle. What remains is not just a catalog of films or a string of affairs. It is the legacy of a woman who dared to live beyond categories. She crossed boundaries others feared, and when she found them, she danced right over them in heels and tuxedo. To remember Marlene Dietrich is to remember possibility, the possibility of a life lived freely, boldly, and unapologetically. She was more than a Hollywood star. She was the eternal rebel, a woman who turned her existence into a declaration that beauty has no single form and freedom has no boundaries. If Marlene Dietrich's story has captivated you, remember this: she was more than a Hollywood legend. She was a woman who lived as if boundaries didn't exist on screen, in love, and in life. Her tuxedos, her kisses, her courage in wartime, and her unapologetic independence still echo today, reminding us that freedom is the most powerful form of beauty. By revisiting her life, we keep her defiance alive. We honor the woman who blurred the lines of gender and desire, who turned scandal into art, and who proved that being unforgettable means refusing to be ordinary. Dietrich's legacy is not locked in the past. It is alive in every artist, every rebel, every soul who dares to live authentically. If her journey moved you, help us share it with the world. Like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story from Hollywood's hidden history. Each view, each share, keeps alive the voices of those who once had to live in shadows. Hollywood may have tried to contain Marlene Dietrich, but she broke free. And now, her story belongs to all of us.